Good evening once again. Thank you for joining me. Um, so here we are. We're on chapter. We're going to start part 3 of Virginia Giuffre's memoir, Nobody's Girl. So I'm getting some lovely comments about reading this book. So I know people are enjoying it. Before we get into today's reading, I wanted to go over a couple of things. First of all, in the last chapter I read, she had said about a minister who had assaulted her intimately. And when I was reading it, I couldn't quite remember the name of the guy. I knew it was someone in the Israel government, but I quickly checked it. I didn't say the name because I didn't want to say the wrong name. So I checked it, and he was actually the Prime Minister of Israel, and more importantly, the Minister of Defense. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty significant disclosure. Obviously, at the time, she didn't know who he was, but she told Epstein what happened. And bear in mind as well, his name is Ehud Barak. So bear in mind, at the time of it happening, as she said, it was violent and malicious. She would have been 17 or 18, I think. He was around 60 years old. And then she told Epstein about it, and he set up another meeting with them on his plane, on his private jet. So, do you know what? All this stuff that has been going on, because I looked up his Wikipedia, nothing about it. I mean, obviously, I'm just saying not just about her, but there is no way that she was his only victim. And the fact that Epstein knew about it and didn't care, I think is really important. So yeah, I wanted to mention him by name, and I wanted to mention where he was from, because there's a lot, again, this is a subject where you hear a lot of conspiracy theories about Epstein and Israel and security secrets and that kind of thing. And it's like, well, this is a significant piece of information that the minister of defense, the prime minister of the country, is doing that to teenagers, and literally nothing has been done about it. Do you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I think that we should really take these bits of information. It's not just about the royal family, although of course he is another one, because the police, all the security services in this country that are paid with our tax money, were covering up for formerly that Andrew person. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. And then another thing I wanted to get to was I had a comment from someone that said that she didn't want to buy the book because she thought the money was going to go to Virginia's husband, or they were estranged. I'm not sure if they're formally divorced. So, I mean, look, if you don't want to buy the book, that's fine. I totally get it. We're in a cost of living crisis. Do you know what I mean? I'm more than happy to read this book and have people come and listen to it for free. But I did want to fact check that comment, because this is a research channel. It's called Go Do Your Own Research. So you know I had to look it up. And I couldn't actually find either way confirmation of whether the money was going to go to him or not. But I will say that the general consensus, because a lot of these articles, when you Google, well, I don't use Google, when you use a search engine, a lot of the articles that give you the information are now behind paywalls. So it's very frustrating. No one's actually asked directly where the profits of the book are going. But from what I could understand, she set up a non-profit foundation in 2023, I think. Well, that was when she got her book publishing deal. And so, like I mentioned before, when she was writing the book, she was still with her husband. And so she protected him in the book, because knowing what we know now, that he was an abusive partner, there is no way he was gonna just let her write a book. I'm sure he was watching over her very carefully, wanting to read what she was writing. Like, do you know what I mean? And then, so when they finally separated, and I was thinking about it as well, I was like, she's signed her book deal, she's setting up the foundation, she's received her settlement from the royal family. She was gaining a lot of independence, and she was traveling by herself, going to be a witness at the trial of Jean-Luc Bernard. So she was really asserting and maybe she was starting to realize, you know, maybe I could live a life of independence now without being battered. And I guess this is just purely a guess, but the more he felt she was becoming independent of him, I guess that was very triggering to him. And he probably sensed it, and he probably was more assertive towards her and more frustrated. So the point I'm trying to get to is that she did disclose to the co-author, which we went over. It was said in the introduction in the first episode I did, that he had been physically harming her, and she wanted it to be publicly known. And since this book's publication, her family have corroborated all of those stories. They've said they want it to be known what he's doing to her. And like I said, you know, the channels that don't want to talk about real issues like domestic violence, they are going along with conspiracies that her dad is pushing, her dad who abused her, that she didn't take her own life. So I think in the end, it all got too much. Her husband resented her independence, her growing independence, and he couldn't control his temper. And as a form of violence, he knew that separating her from her kids was going to be too much for her. And I believe that she would not have wanted the money from this book to go to him. I believe she would have wanted it to go to her kids. And what I did read was that the proceeds of the book were going to go to her foundation. So I guess, this is purely a guess, that she has an estate set up that her children will benefit from without him. And by her family, her brother and his wife and other family members who are supporting the release of this book, I don't think they would be happy to do that if they knew that he was going to benefit from the sale of this book. So I just wanted to quickly go over that point, because I think it is a very important point. Also, we're about to start part 3 of the book, which is called Survivor, and we're going to get to her meeting with her husband. So I haven't actually read this bit yet, but we are going to bear in mind that she is writing this from the POV of an abused victim, and she would have had to tame her narrative at the time of writing. I hope that all makes sense. And hello, Daisy Lee. Lovely to see you. Let's put you up. Oh. Okay, guys, I'm going to get started. This is chapter 16, The Land of Smiles. Picture a wisp of a woman with long blonde hair that falls around her face. She is 19 years old and is traveling abroad by herself for the very first time. She doesn't want to bother you, but will you please take her photograph? She seems friendly, like she would do the same for you. Chances are you say yes. She hands you her pocket-sized disposable camera. Before boarding a plane to Southeast Asia, this teenager made sure to stock up on Kodak Fun Savers, which she tries to always carry with her. Each one has just 27 exposures inside, and she's vowed to use them wisely. Given her situation, it seems smart to conserve resources. Very few photos exist of Jenna Roberts during this time, but maybe that is as it should be. After all, didn't I come to Chiang Mai to disappear? So she's in Thailand. Later, though, I will wish I'd done more to memorialize this period of my life. During the years I'd spent with Epstein and Maxwell, I'd visited many places people write guidebooks about: London, Paris, Tangiers. But I had a feeling this trip to Southeast Asia would be more meaningful, and I was right. What happened in Thailand would set my life on an entirely new course. There's something about being up in the air, especially when traveling solo. It's as if the world below ceases to be, and to me, that is a relief. No one can touch me. I decide when to sleep, when to eat. My own needs, no one else's, come first. During my 21-hour journey from New York to Singapore, and then on to Bangkok, and finally Chiang Mai, I wasn't used to these feelings of independence, but I enjoyed them. By my third and final flight, I was tired, but there was no sleeping now. My body was humming, as if I jolted by electricity. My body was humming as if jolted by electricity. Could it really be that, at least for the moment, I was free? I had read that my destination city was surrounded by mountains, so I craned my neck to try to catch a glimpse of them out the window. Changdeo to the north, Mae Kampong to the east, and Doi Inathon, Thailand's highest peak, to the west. Then we touched down, and I spent the next half hour corralling my 6 overstuffed suitcases. Wow, she did say she was taking a lot of luggage. Finally, a taxi delivered me and my luggage to my hotel. I checked in, and a porter unlocked the door of number 923, leading me into a spacious room with 2 queen-size beds. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out on a shimmering pool. I tipped the smiling porter, and he nodded and closed the door. It was still daytime, but I needed to be unconscious. I closed the curtains and crawled into bed. I wish I could tell you that a few hours later I awoke, grabbed a fun saver, and headed out into the sunshine to explore this exotic new place. Instead, my first 2 days in Chiang Mai, I stayed put, eating fried rice and French fries I ordered from room service and waiting for the phone to ring. Just as in that creepy fifth floor bedroom in Epstein's Manhattan townhouse, I felt as if I were on call and would be punished if I failed to answer. I know that probably sounds ridiculous. There was no one there to reprimand me. Still, I'd lived by Epstein and Maxwell's rules for more than 2 years. When Maxwell called to check in, I picked up before the second ring. On my first day of school, Anticipation woke me early, and I hired a tuk-tuk, one of those motorized three-wheel cabs, to take me to the International Training Massage School. What we will teach you here is a powerful massage technique whose origins go back to the days of the Buddha, the head of school, whose name was Chongkol Setakorn, but he went by John, told us in his orientation lecture. He said the fundamentals of traditional Thai massage, known as Nuad Bo Ran, originated from 2,500 years earlier and had been handed down from generation to generation. Thai massage employed principles of both yoga and acupressure, he said, and was based on the theory that the body consists of some 72,000 energy lines, roughly equivalent to the 12 meridians or energetic pathways of Chinese acupuncture. We students would learn to breathe alongside our clients, to establish compatibility with them, and to use the weight of our bodies to help them stretch and let go of their stress. Oh, I'm feeling relaxed just reading this. John compared the relationship of masseuse and client to a mother who shows love and kindness toward her children. Thai massage could be intense, he said, but fundamentally it should leave both the giver and the receiver refreshed, happy, and energetic. From the start, I was reminded how much I'd once loved school. It was amazing to feel curious again, even as doing so forced me to flash on the childhood abuse that had interrupted my ability to learn. To hear my instructors speak of wholeness and respect and heaven-sent healing was not just intellectually intriguing, it was what I'd spent years yearning for. Now, ITM, which is what everyone called the school, was promising to teach me a set of school skills while also pushing me to grow in a spiritual way. Given how I'd been living, the school's emphasis on psychic release seemed aimed directly at me. The ITM teachers were great at explaining, the ITM teachers were great at explaining the basics of Thai massage, which was fortunate since I had a lot to learn. Unlike what I was used to, this practice made no use of oils, and there were no massage tables. Clients lay face up on mats on the floor while we knelt beside them and sometimes over them, leaning into them with all our strength. We learned to use the balls of our thumbs, not the tips, to target pressure points. The goal was to increase flexibility while releasing both deep and superficial tension, all in the hope of letting energy, or qi, flow more freely. We needed both physical stamina and mental awareness to stay in tune with whomever we were working on, feeling for their heartbeat, trying to align ourselves with their rhythms. Hearing all this, I couldn't help but think about how, without words, I'd forged a trusting relationship with my first horse, Alice, and that gave me confidence. If one of the key elements of Thai massage was reading the cadence of another, I just knew I could be good at it. Classes went from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, with one break for lunch. Every session started with a chanting mantra, whose syllables, in Pali, a derivative of Sanskrit, were spelled out phonetically on a chalkboard. Then we had an hour of yoga and meditation. Finally, we'd break into groups of 3, 2 students, 1 teacher, and take turns massaging and being massaged, with instructors modeling the proper technique and students mimicking them. I preferred giving rather than receiving. I didn't like strangers' hands on me, even through my clothes, but I wanted to learn, so I made the best of it. I can relate to that because the first time I went for a massage, I did not enjoy it. But now I love them. At first, I spent all my time after school at the hotel, but soon I got bolder. Maxwell was calling me almost daily, but she left a message with the front desk if I didn't pick up. When we did talk, if I heard disapproval in her voice, I simply told her how busy school was keeping me. Have you tracked down the girl Guiffre wants you to meet? Maxwell asked in every phone call. I told her no, not yet, and then I promised I would, but I never did. Every time I ignored her commands and nothing bad happened, I got a little braver. Before long, I was exploring Chiang Mai with gusto. Not for nothing was Thailand often referred to as the land of smiles. Every man, woman, and child I met seemed happy to see me, and as I discovered Chiang Mai's celebrated beauty, the joyfulness of its people made more sense. This vibrant city was bound by a moat, and the remains of walls built 1,000 years before, and it was crammed full of temples, monasteries, and stupas, dome-shaped structures erected as Buddhist shrines. Good vibes, it seemed, were everywhere. At one of the city's most famous attractions, the Chiang Mai Night Bazaar, vendors lined up along the footpaths, erecting tables and tents to display their goods. Touristy trinkets, tooled leather, snacks, electronics, clothing. I'd always loved shopping when I travelled, not just to acquire things, but also as a way of interacting with local people. Now I began visiting the bazaar almost every night, walking down the rows of tables, exchanging greetings with the vendors. I knew they were hoping I'd spend some baht at their stalls, but even when I didn't, their warmth felt genuine. Back in my hotel room, I called Tony a lot at first. I was feeling lonely and nervous about what would come next. And as he had since my middle school days, Tony served as my sounding board. Besides, since Epstein was paying the bills, I didn't even consider what those conversations would cost. Years later, phone records unearthed in various legal cases would show that between talking to Tony, returning Maxwell's calls, and letting my family know I was alive, I racked up a phone bill of about $4,000 in under 2 weeks. But it wasn't long before my need to hear Tony's voice waned. 77 students were enrolled at ITM, and after school, groups of us would gather at the city's lively clubs and rooftop bars. For the first time in forever, I felt free to get to know interesting new people my own age without being expected to drop everything if Epstein called, or worse, to recruit for Epstein's use whatever friends I managed to make. After living without autonomy for so long, being in charge of myself felt liberating. When a female classmate of mine complained that her accommodations were crappy, I invited her to stay in my room with me. It may sound like a little thing, but to have the chance to help someone else out of a bad spot without any strings attached filled me with pride. Looking back, though, I see that in addition to enjoying my freedom, I was also behaving recklessly. A few of my fellow ITM students liked to party, smoking pot and trying other drugs, and I fell in with them in our off hours. I justified this by telling myself I couldn't just quit Xanax cold turkey after using it so regularly. And thanks to Epstein's frequent infusions of cash, which I picked up at a Western Union near my hotel, I could buy anything I wanted. Either I was blind to the dangers of procuring drugs in a foreign country, or I didn't care. Probably a little of both. At one point, a male friend and I found ourselves at the wrong end of a dark alley. when the dealer we thought we were meeting sent thugs to rob us instead. We got away on my friend's motorbike, but the night could easily have ended differently. Even after that, though, I spent little time pondering the consequences of my decisions. It wasn't that I thought I was superior or immortal. I have many faults, but arrogance is not one of them. Instead, I think that a core part of me felt undeserving of self-defense. I'd managed to convince Epstein and Maxwell to let me out of their clutches, at least temporarily. In that way, I had successfully advocated for myself, but still, their abuse and the abuse I'd suffered before I met them made me internalize a devastating belief. I wasn't worth protecting. Chapter 17, Bully Basher. I think it was a week into my studies that I met a fellow student named Matthew Olson, a tall, gentle Australian in his mid-20s. Matt and his best friend growing up had come to Chiang Mai together, he said partly so Matt could do his teacher training at ITM. One afternoon, as we were finishing our lessons, Matt asked me and another student if we were up for an excursion. He said his best friend Robbie was studying Thai boxing at a nearby Muay Thai gym, which was having a competition that night. It'll be big fun, he promised, writing down the address for me. I said I'd think about it. I wasn't very interested in martial arts, but later, finding myself with nothing else to do, I put on a little mascara and hired a tuk-tuk. Maybe, I thought, as we wound through traffic, I can convince the gang to go clubbing afterward. Thinking back now, it's funny to me that those were my highest hopes as I arrived. 20 minutes later, at the address in the Sarafai district. Looking around the cavernous space, I was searching for Matt when I spotted a lean, dark-haired man with probing brown eyes who seemed to be holding court inside a circle of friends. Everyone, men and women both, seemed to hang on his every word. In retrospect, maybe they had no choice. I was about to find out that to be near this man was to be swept up by his boisterous presence. But even at a distance, before I knew who he was, I felt instantly drawn to him. A fight began, and I tried to apply what Matt was explaining about Muay Thai, something about it being the art of 8 limbs, because fighters use fists, elbows, knees, and shins, to what I was seeing in the ring. But when I turned my head, my eyes settled again on the dark-haired stranger. Matt must have seen me looking because he said, "That's my friend Robbie." Matt has since told me that, at that same moment, he was noticing something strange. Matt knows Robbie like a brother. They went to and dropped out of high school together and had been roommates for years. So Matt knows how much Robbie likes to analyze other fighters' moves. Usually during a bout, it was impossible to tear Robbie's eyes away from the ring. But on this night, Matt saw that Robbie was uncharacteristically distracted. I didn't see it, but Matt did. Instead of scrutinizing the two sparring partners, Robbie was staring at me. Robbie insists he knew instantly that I was his soulmate. I hear a ruckus behind me and I look around and see this Sheila. Oh my God, that's the Australian word for girl. He'll tell anyone who asks how we met, using the Aussie slang for a pretty woman. I hadn't had that feeling since I was in primary school. I got these butterflies in my belly and I was just like, she's it, the embodiment of beauty. Jenna was special. Even before I spoke to her, I just knew. At this point, he usually pauses for effect, raising his dark eyebrows before adding with a laugh. So I played hard to get. If only this were a joke, but it's true. Whenever I looked Robbie's way that night, he seemed to be engrossed in something or someone else. Robbie says he sensed this was the only way to win me, and while I felt frustrated then, I think he was probably right. Had he come on strong, I would have deflected, batting him away. After so many years of forced intimacy, I could be aloof when I felt pressured. I didn't know how to handle feelings of sincere mutual attraction, but as Robbie leaned out, I found myself leaning in. When the final bout ended and everybody headed to the exits, I knew I needed to make a move. It was that or give up, but something about Robbie made me feel that giving up wasn't an option. So I maneuvered myself to be at Robbie's side as we squeezed through the crowd and out onto the street. "I'm Jenna," I said, smiling. "Want to share a tuk-tuk?" I'll never forget the way Robbie looked at me then, his face close to mine. His gaze was steady and calm, but the lights were on in his eyes. He waited a beat and then he said what he's been saying to me in one form or another every day since. Yes. Remember who I was in 2002. A survivor of SA who'd spent years obediently performing intimate acts on men and women, some of them repeat abusers, some of them utter strangers, without any true feelings of closeness or affinity or desire. In fact, cutting myself off from my own wishes or wants had been one of my coping mechanisms. Even relationships with my past boyfriends had had a transactional quality. I had never been in love, not once, not with anyone, but now, almost instantly, I was falling in crazy love with Roberto Antonio Guiffre. In the tuk-tuk, I noticed that I liked the way his body felt next to mine, its temperature, its solidity, its warmth. I loved the way he smelled. I took Robbie back to the Royal Princess that night, but we just hung out with my roommate and eventually we went home. For the next 3 days, he continued his hard-to-get act, and he was so convincing that I was beginning to think he just wanted to be friends. Here are a few things I quickly learned about Robbie. He was smart, he was funny, he was loyal. The youngest of 4 children, born to Sicilian parents who'd immigrated to Sydney. Robbie, then 26, so he's still a little bit older than her, had been very religious as a child and attended church frequently with his mother. But at the age of 9, he'd begun to have night terrors in which he believed he was being held down by a terrible force. Wow. The dream scared him so much that he turned away from Catholicism and began to study other forms of spirituality. I went into the forest and said, "You know what? No more fear. Fear holds you back," he told me, recalling how he began to read up on everything from Islam to Buddhism to shamanism. His studies brought him back again and again to a respect for nature, which he said gave him the sense of peace he was looking for. "I've always had a connection to Mother Earth. Put me in the bush with a campfire and I'm centered. The cycles of the seasons just make sense to me," he told me. All my reading about different religions gave me a path to follow. You walk your walk. You look back at the sand and you see your own footprints. The goal is flow, balance. It's your own dharma. Dharma? Karma? I don't know what that means. I didn't know dharma from Parmesan cheese, and I told him so. But he didn't care. And just as importantly, he didn't judge me. He seemed to want to lift me up, not tear me down. A lifelong protector of the picked on, he'd seen himself as what he called a bully basher. Long before he'd laid eyes on me, he said, as a kid, he'd made it his business to wait after school to punish those who picked on those smaller than themselves. I'm a scrapper, he said, always have been. On the third day of our relationship, we met up again at my hotel. My roommate was out, and Robbie and I were getting ready to go to dinner. I was sitting on the floor, and he was on the bed, and when he bent over to tie his shoe, I planted a kiss on him. I wasn't sure what would happen. Maybe he just wasn't into me, but he kissed me back. I remember I got hold of him then, and for the first time since I'd embraced my childhood best friend Kyle, I did so purely out of desire, not obligation or desperation. From the start, Robbie and I had a different connection than any I'd experienced before. For one thing, Robbie was straightforward. How, he wanted me to know, could a 19-year-old massage student afford such swank accommodations in a 4-star hotel? We were sitting in my room, just the two of us, when he asked that question, and suddenly I wanted to tell the truth. After a lifetime of toggling between two modes, run and survive, I wanted more than mere survival, and I was tired of running. Against all logic, something in me already believed this could be a relationship with real potential. A relationship that I didn't want to F up. And the more I talked to Robbie, the more I felt that way. I was sick of keeping secrets, of hiding what my life was really like. So I took a deep breath and told Robbie that I worked for a rich, powerful man who abused me. That this man had a female partner who enabled and orchestrated an army of young women and girls to service him, that he and she lent me out to their friends, some of whom had hurt me beyond measure, and that I was deeply afraid of them. As I spewed all this awfulness, Robbie's face constricted. Where's your family? He asked pointedly. Can't they help you? I told him they couldn't or wouldn't. I had never been sure which. I remember that Robbie had a knowing look on his face then, like he could intuit what I was leaving out. I had a rough childhood, I stammered. The way Robbie locked eyes with me then, as if to say, you're not alone anymore, told me I didn't need to reveal any terrible details to be understood. At least not yet. Robbie sensed we'd have plenty of time to get into all that. At first glance, Robbie and I were complete opposites. Me, the slight, fair-haired waif, him, the muscle-bound athlete whose body was covered in a silky carpet of dark fur. But we fit together. I felt like a different Jenna when I was with Robbie. I'd never met anyone like him. When we made love for the first time, he asked me something no other person had ever asked: what I did and didn't like in bed. As it turned out, there were lots of things I didn't like. Things that reminded me of past non-consensual encounters. But I didn't share that with Robbie yet. I still believed that my role was to focus on my partner's pleasure, not my own. My understanding of loving and feeling loved was extremely limited. For so long, I had only been seen as good if I did what was required of me, no matter how painful or upsetting. Now, here came a man who claimed he didn't require me to do anything. He wanted me to be myself, he said. I didn't admit it to Robbie then, but it had been years since I knew who myself was. Part of me was stuck in time, as if still a little girl, I knew I felt safe when I was with Robbie, though I knew I felt safe when I was with Robbie, though, and I hadn't experienced safety since I was 6 years old and sitting atop Alice. That's her horse. Robbie asked more questions about Epstein and Maxwell. How often did they check in on me? How soon was I expected to return to the US? I remember I was crying as I told him I wasn't sure how I could ever break free from Epstein and Maxwell's web. But Robbie shook his head. You don't have to live that way, he said, taking my hand. Come back to Australia with me. A week into knowing each other, he dropped down onto one knee and proposed. You won't be rich, he told me, but I will work hard to support you. I'll never hurt you, never betray you. I'll be here for you and always love you. I'll have your back until we die. I'd never thought I'd hear those words from anyone as I told him yes. Happy tears ran down my cheeks. I love you too, I said. Some people, when they hear our story, marvel at how quickly we moved after that. After all, it's no small task to plan a wedding, especially in a country whose language you don't speak. And then there's the fact that we barely knew one another. But Robbie and I shared a belief that we had been destined to meet and be together. Fueled by that certainty, we found a seamstress to sew me a simple white halter dress and to tailor a dark olive suit for Robbie. I picked the colour to match the green flecks in his eyes. I bought him a necklace with a Buddha pendant. He gave me a Thai gold ring that had sapphires arranged in the shape of a heart. It would eventually turn my finger green, but it was all we could afford. And on October 16th, 2002, just 10 days after first laying eyes on one another, we hired a translator named Charlie and stepped aboard a tram that would take us to the top of a mountain. Our destination, Wat Phra Tut Doi Suthep, the glorious temple where we'd been married. Doi Suthep, as the temple is known, is a holy place marked by gilded pagodas, statues, and shrines. According to legend, it exists because in the 14th century AD, a monk named Sumanathira, sorry, I'm probably butchering these names, had a dream that he was supposed to go to the city of Pangcha to look for a relic. He followed the premonition and found that many believed to be the Gautama Buddha's shoulder bone. When the reigning king of Thailand heard of the discovery, he had the monk bring it to him. Half the bone, which had split in two, was placed on the back of a white elephant, which was then set free. The elephant made its way up the steep 3,400-foot Doi Suthep mountain, stopped at the summit, trumpeted 3 times, and dropped dead. Why does that story sound a little bit unbelievable? Seeing this as a good omen, the king ordered that a temple be built there in the year 1383. My favourite part of the legend was that the Buddha's shoulder bone was said to have magical powers. Among them was that the bone was able to vanish. On my wedding day, I was determined to do the same, at least when it came to Epstein and Maxwell. I no longer wanted to be seen. When he'd asked me to marry him, Robbie had given me the chance to achieve that goal. We were 2 people from 2 different countries who'd met in a yet third country and fallen in love almost overnight. For days we'd been swept away by one another, as if there were no one else on this earth but us. Today we would become husband and wife. As the tram ascended, I looked at my reflection in its glass windows. My new dress fit perfectly. My hair was mostly up, with a few tendrils falling around my face, and I wore a crown of baby's breath and small yellow and purple flowers. She looked so pretty in her wedding, but I tried to look for some pictures before I came on here, and I couldn't really find any. Only the one I posted in the thumbnail. The vision made me cry again, overcome by the idea that I might be in control of my own life at last. Confused, Robbie asked if I was having second thoughts. No, not at all, I reassured him. But until you, I said, I thought weddings were for other people, not for me. I felt like I was inhabiting a dream. When we reached the mountain summit, we each tied 7 strings around one another's wrists, as Thai brides and grooms do. Each string signified something we hoped for: long life, enduring love, friendship, fertility, prosperity, sustenance, freedom. When we exchanged vows inside the temple, kneeling in front of a monk who wore flowing orange robes, they told us we were the first Westerners ever to do so. Matt, our only witness, used one of my fund savers to take our picture. After the short ceremony, that must be the picture that I came across. After the short ceremony, we descended into the city again. We called our parents. Robbie's in New South Wales, Australia, mine in Florida, and after they recovered from their astonishment, each one of them wished us well. Robbie took me out for ice cream, then we headed back to the Royal Princess. Opening the door to our room, I saw nothing but rose petals on the threshold, strewn from the doorway to the bed and arranged in a heart shape on the coverlet. Robbie had asked the hotel to turn our room into a bridal suite, and boy, had they pulled it off. When we flung ourselves on the bed, sending the rose petals flying, I had never felt so tethered to another human being. I only hoped I could make Robbie happy. Oh. Our wedding day was almost over when I realised I had one more call to make. Robbie had made clear that he needed to hear me tell Epstein and Maxwell goodbye. He wanted that for himself, he said, but also for me. I had a right to assert myself, he said, to choose my own path. Robbie believed it would be good for me and for us if I said so out loud. I agreed with him in principle, but still I hesitated. Even with 8,000 miles between us, I was afraid of them. Finally, I dialed Epstein's cell phone. I felt a churning in my gut as I waited for him to answer. Would he yell? More likely he'd threaten. I knew he would stop paying my way at the Royal Princess. Robbie and I were prepared for that, but could I truly sever my ties to the powerful people who'd ruled my life for more than 2 years? I still wasn't sure. A few tense moments passed before Epstein picked up. Hello, he said, and his voice, that smug Brooklyn growl, sounded impatient. I fell in love and got married, Jeffrey, I blurted out. I'm never coming back. There was the briefest pause. Have a great life, he said. Then a click. Epstein had hung up on me. We wouldn't speak again for more than 5 years. Okay, we've got through that bit. Hi. Hi, Diamond Media. Appreciate you too. Okay, let's crack on. Let's crack on. Chapter 18, Honeymooners. Look, if you had one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted in one moment, would you capture it or just let it slip? In the soundtrack of my life, no song better fits the start of my new life with Robbie than Eminem's Lose Yourself, which was released just days after we married. At the beginning of our relationship, still so new to one another, but already completely attached, we must have listened to that song 1,000 times. You better lose yourself in the music, the moment, you own it, you better never let it go, Eminem warned us, and we listened. You only get one shot. Do not miss your chance to blow. This opportunity comes once in a lifetime, Eminem rapped, and I believed him. Robbie was my one shot, my true love, a gift I had never imagined I'd received. The day after our wedding, we'd moved out of the Royal Princess and found cheaper accommodations. I also let the massage school know I was withdrawing. I'd loved my brief interlude with ITM, and I had completed 2 of its 5 levels of instruction. But I didn't have enough money of my own to continue. Besides, Robbie wanted to take me on a honeymoon. It's kind of odd that they didn't pay the bill up front, but I guess it was a different time. Maybe you could pay for bills at the end of courses in those days. I think we spent 3 more days in Chiang Mai. Then, after a quick luggage edit, Robbie said I could only take 3 of my 6 suitcases. We set off by train. We were headed to Vientiane, the capital city of Laos, 400 miles or so to the east, to get my passport stamped. Robbie was hoping that if we pinched our pennies, we could travel around Thailand for a few months, but my student visa was set to run out in just a few weeks. If I left the country, even briefly, and then entered again, Robbie had been told the clock would restart and I'd have more time to explore. So while Vientiane was hardly a romantic destination, that's where we needed to go. Yeah, a lot of dodgy stuff goes on in Laos, by the way. When we arrived, tired and sweaty, it was late afternoon. Robbie had warned me that the place was far from picturesque, but I was still appalled by the sight of children squatting and urinating in the streets. Soldiers were everywhere, just waiting to enforce the 9 p.m. curfew. We were so obviously tourists, with Robbie somehow carrying my 3 suitcases and his own big backpack, and I knew we stuck out like sore thumbs. So once we got proof of my visit to Laos stamped in ink on my passport, I told Robbie I wanted to get out of there. We took a boat back across the Mekong River, found a cheap hotel, and slept in Thailand that night. In the morning, we got on another train. Our next stop, about 800 miles south, was Surat Thani, a transport hub where we'd catch a bus and later a ferry that would deliver us to our ultimate destination, Koh Pha Nhan, an island that Robbie and Matt had visited when they first arrived in Thailand. This magical place, one of 3 islands off the southeastern coast in the Gulf of Thailand, was renowned for its monthly full moon party, an all-night celebration tied to the lunar calendar that attracted throngs of tourists. But Robbie promised me the island was also the perfect place to spend one-on-one time. Beautiful, peaceful, affordable. Sitting on a bench in the crowded, rusty ferry boat that took us from the mainland to Koh Phangan Tong Sala Beach, I was transfixed by the view. The ocean was an unbelievable shade of luminescent blue, and above it, like a frosting on a cake, was the lighter blue strip of the sky. A Thai man next to us was carrying a rooster that he had trained to sit on command. Every time the rooster sat down, I burst out laughing. Robbie held me tight with one powerful arm. I was happy. Stepping onto the dock on Thong Sala Beach, we were immediately surrounded by locals, all of them tugging at our sleeves, each more determined than the next to lure us to stay in the hotel he or she was there to represent. One young man handed Robbie a printed business card that said, Two Sons Resort. On the card, handwritten in English, I can get you anything you want. Robbie looked at me and grinned. Two Sons would be our place. For less than $6 a night, we rented a private bungalow 100 feet from the ocean. The resort was run by a family who cooked all our meals. I was still shy about eating new foods. Epstein's strict diet regimens had made me hyper-focused on remaining thin, and even the blandest Asian delicacies, pad thai noodles, say, seemed off-putting. But Robbie was encouraging, and for him I tried to be brave. Thai beer was cheap and the sun was hot. Truly, we were in paradise. As we lay around on the sand, Robbie and I began really getting to know one another. He told me about his parents, Antonia and Frank. His dad had once worked painting and refurbishing fishing boats, but now the family ran a catering business in Sydney. Robbie told me about his older siblings, two brothers, Gaetano, who everyone calls Guy, and Frank Jr., and a sister, Angela. Robbie had dropped out of high school because he was bored, he said, though he'd later finished another year through a correspondence course. At 17, he'd moved out of his parents' house and lived for a few years with a Korean woman who became his fiancée, despite her parents' objections. I stayed longer than I needed to, he said of that relationship. Instead, while he'd never lacked for female companionship, Robbie tended to be a one-woman man, not a player. The dream. He said he'd always prided himself on having close women friends, and he was often the bloke who gave these Sheilas romantic advice. My new husband had strong opinions, I was learning, but also understood that people moved at their own pace. To be a bully basher, you must have a sixth sense for spotting vulnerability, but Robbie's response, the polar opposite of Epstein's, was to help, not to hurt. Robbie asked more about my family and my upbringing too, and bit by bit, I divulged the ugliest parts of my childhood as I described what my father and Forrest had done to me and what my mother had failed to do in response. I saw anger in Robbie's eyes. All families have their difficulties, his face said, but this was beyond the pale. Where were your brothers? He demanded, clearly imagining how he would have reacted if his sister had been so mistreated. I explained that Danny was sent away to boarding school and that Skydie was a kid too small to defend me, and besides, neither of them knew because I never told them. Robbie just shook his head, then opened his arms wide to envelop me in a hug. At one point, I asked Robbie if he believed in God. God is like the wind, he said, explaining how reading about paganism had taught him to see God in nature. Can you see the wind? No, but you can feel it when it brushes your cheek. Did I believe in God? I couldn't answer that. I'd always been comforted by the idea of reincarnation because it promised that my piss-poor excuse for a life was not the only one I was going to get. But God, I wasn't sure. Hadn't Forrest, one of my earliest abusers, invoked God to manipulate me, just as the counsellors at Growing Together, that's the rehab centre, had done? In my experience, God had been wielded by others to get what they wanted. Still, meeting Robbie at the very moment I needed him most seemed the best evidence I've ever had of the existence of something divine. Lying in the sand on that pristine island, exchanging stories about our lives and beliefs, we covered a lot of ground in a short time. For example, we talked about Robbie's spirituality, dovetailed with his interest in fighting. He'd grown up watching Monkey Magic, a wacky cult Japanese TV show that played on Australian TV every Sunday night. From the moment he discovered the show, whose title character is an ape, a skilled fighter and the king of his tribe, who achieves enlightenment through martial arts, Robbie was fascinated with the Buddhist concept of satori, the sudden comprehension of one's true nature. The nature of Monkey was irrepressible, said a voiceover in the show's opening montage, and Robbie could relate. That's his spiritual awakening owed such a debt to a badly dubbed 1980s TV series could be seen as funny, he knew. But hey, he said, you take your illumination wherever you can find it. Martial arts is not just about fighting, he told me. It's a way of thinking, a way of life. Robbie was fascinated by the idea that through intense physical conditioning, you could prepare yourself for anything. One of my teachers was all about controlling your punches, Robbie told me. You were not allowed to land a hit. You had to stop an inch away from your opponent's face. Instead of dominating them with force, you blocked their blows and let them wear themselves out. We used to take broken bottles and scrape our shins so that after a while we couldn't feel anything. Okay. My body got conditioned to the point where if someone hit me, I'd just look at them and smile. I'd never set foot inside a boxing ring, but I understood at least a version of what Robbie was talking about. Shoring yourself up to increase the odds of your own survival. I'd spent my life blocking the blows of others, wishing they'd tire of abusing me, and at least for a while I'd gotten good at blotting out feelings while keeping a smile plastered on my face. Robbie's experience helped me look at my own from a different vantage point. I flashed on the mantra I'd learned at ITN, the Pali prayer in which we asked to attain the knowledge of all nature. Was this how I would do that? Not just knowledge of the world around me, but of my internal self. I sensed that I was beginning a process that would not be easy. One thing, though, could not have been easier: hanging out with Robbie. Being with him never felt like a chore. Despite our differences, we seemed to move at the same rhythm. He introduced me to an Australian rock band called Powderfinger, and I fell in love with their biggest hit, whose lyrics, "My happiness is slowly creeping back. Now you're at home. If it ever starts sinking in, it must be when you pack up and go," described to a T the feeling of pining for a lover who's far away. I told Robbie I never wanted to be far away from him. One night, I told Robbie there was something I needed him to help me do. First, we went to a bar in Koh Pha Nhan so I could sip a little liquid courage. I think I've told you that Jeffrey Epstein prohibited tattoos, I said. taking a swallow of Thai whiskey. Robbie nodded. He had a yin and yang symbol on his right shoulder that I had admired, but he knew I didn't have any ink. Well, there's a tattoo parlor next door, and I need you to come with me and hold my hand. A few minutes later, I told a Thai tattoo artist what I wanted and where I wanted it, and then lay face down on a table. Soon I had a blue butterfly to symbolize the freedom of flight and the words "In love with Robbie G" on the small of my back. Actually, the artist misspelled Robbie using one B. To this day, in my phone, my husband's contact number is filed under Roby. In my mind, my new tattoo accomplished two goals. First, declaring my commitment to Robbie for all the world to see, and second, guaranteeing that I would repulse Epstein, who shunned tattooed girls. As I told Robbie, only half joking, this is an insurance policy because now Jeffrey wouldn't want me, even if he could make me come back. We must have been at the Two Sons for about a week when Matt showed up for a visit. Back in Chiang Mai, Matt had first been worried when he heard how quickly Robbie and I planned to wed. He thought Robbie's parents would kill him for not somehow slowing us down. Robbie had always had a way with the ladies, Matt knew. I don't think I've ever known him to be single, he'd tell me later. But Matt could see that Robbie's and my connection was deeper than those he'd witnessed before. So Matt had stood up for us at that mountaintop temple, and now he had arrived to make sure all was well. You know you can learn a lot about people by the company they keep. From ITM, I already knew that Matt had a kind way about him, but to see Matt and Robbie together showed me a different side of my new husband. They teased each other relentlessly, but with affection. Matt had had a rough upbringing after his parents' divorce. He'd left his mother's home at 15 and moved to Sydney in search of his father. After he and Robbie met, Robbie's family had eventually taken Matt in. They'd been friends ever since. We were on the beach, drinking beer, when Matt turned to Robbie with a serious look on his face. "Do you think it's a coincidence, Rob?" he asked. "What are you talking about?" Robbie said. "Petra," Matt said, and I watched Robbie's mouth drop open. Robbie is a talker. It's usually hard to get a word in edgeways around him, but now he was mute, and his tan brown face had gone a little pale. "Who's Petra?" I asked. Matt looked at Robbie and, after getting a nod of approval, turned to me. Here we go. "You know by now that Rob is a searcher," he began. "Well, about 2 years ago, we heard about a psychic named Petra who lived out in the Campbelltown, that's west of Sydney. Friends told us she was the real deal. Matt was reluctant to go see her, he said, but not because he doubted her powers. He had an aunt who could see the future, so he knew such people existed. For a variety of reasons, however, he didn't want to know what life had in store for him. Robbie, though, was gung-ho. He couldn't wait to track Petra down." "So what did Petra say?" I asked. "She said Rob would travel a long distance to meet a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl who would be his only one." I couldn't believe it. I turned to look at Robbie, who was shaking his head. "I'd forgotten, mate," he stammered, clapping Matt on the shoulder. Then he took a deep breath and turned back to me. He was still processing the memory. "There's more to this story," Robbie said. "Right before Matt and I left for Thailand, another good mate of mine asked me to be the best man at his wedding. When I told him I'd already bought my ticket to Bangkok, he tried to persuade me to push the trip back a month, but I said no. I don't know why, I told him, but I've just got to go now. So now I'm realizing why. If I'd have come a month later, I wouldn't have met you. This was like a fairy tale, I thought, as Robbie took my hand and held it. I told you, believe in us, baby, he said. I believe we are meant to be. Apparently, though, we were also meant to face adversity together. Robbie and I had befriended a charming 19-year-old Canadian, one of several travellers from all over the world who were staying at the Two Suns. After Matt said goodbye, promising to reconnect with us soon in Australia, we invited the Canadian to join us one night to party inside our bungalow. We thought he was terrific until the next morning, when we discovered most of our money was gone. Robbie ran outside half-dressed and raced to the raised structure where the Canadian had been staying. But on the way, he encountered two Irish women who told him the guy had booked it out of there just after sunrise. We were out more than $2,000. We had only $200 or so left. Months later, Robbie would say that the robbery was a blessing. It was time to get out of holiday mode and come back down to earth, to get back into real life, he'd say. But in that moment, we panicked. The robbery meant our honeymoon was over, obviously. But worse than that, while Robbie had already bought his return ticket to Australia, I had no ticket to fly, and now we couldn't afford to buy one. Robbie called his parents. I'm sure they were wondering who was this woman who'd bewitched their son and who was now stranded with him, nearly penniless, on a remote tropical island. But they stepped up to help us, as they would do so many times in the coming years, paying $800 for my flight to Sydney and sending a little more money to tide us over until we got there. We packed up and told the Two Suns goodbye, retraced our steps from our honeymoon paradise to Bangkok, and then checked into a dingy, dirt-cheap backpackers' hotel to await our departure. There was one glitch in the plan. Robbie's parents had not been able to get me on his direct flight, so we'd be travelling separately. My flight would leave a few hours earlier than his did and would connect through Singapore. Realizing this, I was filled with dread. I'd come to rely on how secure Robbie made me feel. The next day, as Robbie walked me to my gate at Bangkok International Airport, I didn't want to let go of his hand. I'll see you on the other side of the world, Robbie said, grinning. I tried to smile too, but I didn't completely succeed. We kissed goodbye and I got on the plane. It turns out I was right to be nervous. When I landed in Singapore and tried to make my way to my connecting flight, customs officials descended upon me. If I was not an Australian citizen, they wanted to know, why did I have a one-way ticket into the country? Where, they demanded, was my travel visa to Australia? I had no idea I'd needed one. Maxwell had always handled those matters for me before. I was almost hysterical with fear. If they sent me back to Bangkok, I didn't know what I'd do. I thought of the time back in Florida when Tony stole the tip money and got me fired, and I'd had no choice but to go crawling back to Epstein. Was this going to be like that? A brief escape followed by a pitiful return to purgatory? In my despair, I yearned for Robbie, who by this point was somewhere above the South China Sea. But I was going to have to figure this out on my own. I don't think I've ever been more persuasive. It helped that I was telling the authorities the truth, that I'd just married an Australian citizen. I showed them the 7 strings around my wrist. Where was the marriage license, they wanted to know. Of course, I didn't have one. Later, we'd end up having to get remarried in Australia to make our union legal. But I pulled out several of the photographs Matt had taken with my fun saver, feeling grateful that I'd hurried to get them developed. The customs officials looked at the photos, then back at me, and then a miracle. They let me go on my connecting flight. That is a miracle. 8 hours later, I arrived in Sydney and stepped into the terminal feeling both exhilarated and anxious. Robbie's parents were coming to meet us, and since I'd landed before Robbie, I would need to introduce myself. Coming out of the baggage area, I saw an older couple behind a rope. A wiry, white-haired gentleman and a stout, broad-shouldered woman whose round face was framed by an auburn pixie cut. They looked like the people that Robbie had described. I took a deep breath and headed towards them, forcing a smile. "I'm Jenna," I said, extending my hand, which Nina and Frank each shook, nodding politely. Then we just stood there together, not talking, waiting for Robbie. I'd soon learn that Frank spoke little English, but I didn't know that then. So the silence made me worry that they already disapproved of me. Finally, after what seemed like an hour but was only a few minutes, I glimpsed Robbie walking toward us down a long hallway. Relief washed over me. Slipping under the ropes separating us from the passengers-only area, I sprinted until I was in his arms. We'd made it together. Now our new life could truly begin. We are over halfway through. Okay, shall we do one more chapter? Let me see. Yeah, okay, we'll do a couple more. I might as well keep going. Chapter 19, Down Under. When I picture myself during my first few days in Australia, I have to laugh. I am standing behind the stove in my in-laws' kitchen, learning how to make coffee the Italian way, one strong cup at a time. I pour water into a tiny silver percolator, then spoon finely ground coffee into the sieve-like reservoir through which hot water will soon flow. It's a cozy scene except for what I'm wearing, a skimpy undershirt and Daisy Duke cut-off shorts with my thong underwear protruding from the waistband. To see me, you might think I'm trying to show off my body, but that isn't right. While in Epstein's employ, I'd been encouraged to wear clothes that made me look even younger than I was. Now, no longer Epstein's captive, I was a wife, a grown woman, but I still felt and dressed like a teenage girl. I didn't have the slightest idea how an adult version of me should look. When I moved into Frank and Nina's house, that was just the beginning of what I didn't know. I had never loaded a dishwasher, for example, or scrambled an egg, or separated laundry into darks and lights. I'd never opened a bank account, or filed income taxes, or made a good cup of coffee. The list went on and on. Sometimes the weight of my ignorance overwhelmed me. What is adulthood, I wondered, and will I ever master it? What is it to be a wife? It would take time for me to figure out the answers. I just can't imagine how difficult this must have been for her. But yeah. Our first weekend in Australia, Robbie took me camping in Hunter Valley, north of Sydney, with a group of his friends. The place is one of the country's major wine regions, but we had so little money that Robbie decreed we were there to rough it and enjoy the natural beauty, not to sip Shiraz. I was good with that until I saw where we were sleeping, a ramshackle shed. That weekend was quite an introduction to my new country. Yes, we saw a few Aboriginal cave paintings, but the weather was freezing, and the only kangaroo we spotted appeared to have been dead for months. A few days after our return, I fell terribly ill with some sort of flu. When I spiked a fever, Robbie was at work. He'd gotten a construction job. I felt awful, clammy and hot. I didn't want to be a pain in anyone's arse, and especially since I'd just learned the Aussie phrase having a whinge, complaining for no reason. I did not know that was Australian. I was determined to be stoic, but when Robbie's dad discovered how sick I was, he swung into action, whipping up his special zuppa di lenticchie, or lentil soup. I was too weak to get out of bed, but Frank propped me up on my pillows and then sat beside me, feeding me spoonfuls until I was full. Later, as I passed in and out of a sweaty, delirious sleep, he returned every few minutes to cool my forehead with a damp cloth. When my fever broke, Frank bought me coffee that was creamy from the raw egg he'd stirred into it. Ugh. Raw egg in coffee? After I'd recovered, Frank sat with me and showed me how to peel a prickly pear, teaching me how to avoid nettles, which will embed themselves like fiberglass in your fingers if you aren't careful. He didn't say much, just as Robbie had warned that he wouldn't. But in those first weeks that I was in Sydney, Frank gave me more nurturing than I ever got from my own father. The women of the Guiffre clan were more sceptical of me. Robbie's mom especially is blunt and quick to call out wrongdoing, and at first she was suspicious of this skinny American who'd crash landed on her doorstep. Then, just before Christmas, Nina took me to the home of some of Robbie's aunties, or Zias. It was cannelloni making day, and I was being drafted to help. I knew nothing about making cannoli, of course, but I quickly figured out the assembly line, pounding out the dough, then rolling it thin and wrapping it around bamboo poles that we dipped into a fryer, taking care not to burn them. Then we stuffed the crispy shells with 3 kinds of fillings: ricotta, vanilla cream, and chocolate. We must have made 300 cannoli that day, and when I returned home, I had ricotta in my hair. But I passed some sort of test. The Zias were proud of me. Married life took some getting used to. I couldn't get a work permit until we were legally married, which we would accomplish in January 2003. But already Robbie was working all the time, trying to make good on his promise to provide for me. I helped out when I could with the Guiffre family's catering business, hauling steam trays, doing dishes, waitressing when needed. I liked keeping busy and contributing to this family I'd just joined, but at the same time, I was struggling to come to terms with my new existence. Robbie's and my sex life, for example. I was fiercely attracted to him, but I still sometimes had trouble letting myself fully enjoy being with him in bed. Before Robbie, I'd been a sort of zombie when it came to sex, going through the motions, keeping my true self under a psychic lock and key. I had also been trained to do things that Robbie found downright weird. I remember the first time I jumped out of bed right after we made love, only to return with a warm, wet washcloth. When I tried to clean Robbie up, like Epstein had required me to, my husband took hold of my wrist. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. "That's not right. Lay down with me instead." I did so, as he asked, and I never brought a washcloth to bed again. But while this should have been a relief, it also left me confused. That act, however demeaning, had been expected of me for so long, and I'd been praised for it. Now that I wasn't doing it anymore, I was unsure what to do with myself. Instead, it was difficult just to relax. "What do you like and not like in bed?" Robbie had asked soon after we met. Now, little by little, I began to acknowledge that there were things I wasn't comfortable with. For example, I wasn't wild about giving BJs. Too many memories of unwelcome hands pushing on the back of my neck, forcing me to swallow. And receiving oral only reminded me of my dad. This was a lot for Robbie, hearing how much my past abusers had ruined for me, and also for him, when he first realised how much I was effectively removing from the menu of our intimate life. Robbie looked a little stunned, but then he made it okay. There were lots of ways to make each other feel good, he told me, as we lay around in bed. "I want you to feel loved," he said. I did feel loved most of the time, but then my past would intervene. I didn't want to think about the billionaires, the former minister. Anyone who has just joined, I disclosed that the name of the former minister was the former Prime Minister of Israel, who was also the Defense Minister of Israel, called Ehud Barak. And all the others. But sometimes during sex, a contorted face would pop into my head, and I'd remember. This was awful in myriad ways. Experiencing flashbacks in the first place, obviously, but also trying to shield Robbie from knowing it was happening. I wanted both to protect him and at the same time to keep him from knowing how damaged his new wife really was. But whenever Robbie got an inkling that I was trying to hide something, he felt as if I was shutting him out. "We were a team," he said. "We needed to deal with these things together." I knew that made sense, but at times, that kind of wide open togetherness was more than I could handle. While we were still living with his parents in Sydney, Robbie, knowing how much I missed Mary Jane, the Chow Chow I'd left in Florida, brought me a Jack Russell Terrier. I named him Champion, Champ for short, and he gave my day structure. Like any dog, Champ needed to be walked, which got me out of the house. But his unrelenting Jack Russell brain also demanded that I engage with him constantly. I couldn't just retreat into my own memories. Champ wouldn't allow it. Being driven by the needs of others was familiar to me, but with Champ, that was a healthy impulse. Robbie and I had always planned to move out of his parents' home eventually, but Champ's arrival hastened that decision. Frank and Nina were from the old country, so they believed animals should be kept outside. My need to have Champ on my lap at the table in our bed made them crazy. So in early 2003, Robbie and I moved into our first apartment in Parramatta, a bustling, artsy, multicultural neighbourhood. The walls of our tiny two-bedroom second-floor walk-up were thin. I remember our lovely Indian next-door neighbours had a new baby whose cries we heard at all hours. I'm also sure they heard Robbie and me fighting. Uh-oh. Too often, usually after drinking too much, we'd go out hammer and tong. "Why didn't I clean the house?" he'd yell when he was working so hard. "Why couldn't he come home earlier?" I'd scream when he knew I was so lonely. Sometimes he'd call me on his lunch break and I'd just be waking up. "What are you doing, just faffing around?" he'd ask, using Aussie slang for wasting time. "Jenna, you're acting like a child." That made me angry, but the truth was, in some ways, I still was a child. A perfect example, we were so poor at first, we couldn't even afford a sofa.
But Robbie scrimped and saved, and one morning before he left for work, he gently nudged me awake. "I know how much you love shopping," he said, stroking my face. "Go out today and buy us some furniture." He handed me $1,000 in cash. "This won't get us much. You'll probably need to go to a second-hand store, but it'll be a start." That night, when he came home, I proudly showed him what I'd bought for us, an Xbox game console. "Jenna, are you kidding?" Robbie said, trying not to laugh or explode or both. "I thought it'd be fun," I said. "It comes with 2 controllers so we can play together." "But we have nowhere to sit, Jenna. What were you thinking?" I felt embarrassed and defensive. "What I was thinking is that all you do is work," I fumed. "I was just trying to bring some laughter into the house." What I didn't say, because I was ashamed to admit it, was that the thought of going to a furniture store alone had paralyzed me. I didn't know how to shop for furniture because I'd never seen anybody do it. I was afraid of doing it wrong. So I'd blown all our money on something I knew how to buy, a toy. The fact that I was unprepared to run a household, one morning, the fact was that I was unprepared to run a household. One morning, I came into the kitchen and encountered the hugest spider I'd ever seen, just enjoying itself on the wall next to the sink. I can deal with many things that make other people squeamish. Worms don't scare me, snakes are a breeze, but spiders, ever since Forrest and my dad took me to see arachnophobia with them, I've been deathly afraid. So I called Robbie at work and said I needed him to come home. "I'm sorry, sweetie," he said, sounding distracted. "I can't leave." "But it's looking at me," I pleaded, risking a glance at the spider's many eyeballs. "Is it a huntsman?" he asked. "What's a huntsman?" I practically screamed. Robbie explained. "The huntsman spider, also known as the giant crab spider, looks a little like a tarantula, but bigger. And of course, sorry, this is all the photos. I wish I could post them up. One of the places on the planet that the huntsman spider thrives is Australia. The monster I was having a staring contest with looked as big as a dessert plate. "It's a huntsman," I said, hoping that would motivate Robbie to come save me. But he just laughed. "Darling, you could sleep next to that spider," he said. "It's ugly, but it won't hurt you." Well, that did nothing to reassure me, so I hung up on Robbie and called his dad, who came right over with a broom. "I'll kill it for you," he said valiantly. "I'll kill it dead." And soon the huntsman was no more. I wish my own father had treated me with similar care. Sometime in this period, I got Dad on the phone. He and my mom had separated. They were headed for divorce. They'd sold the Rackley Road house where I'd grown up, and my mom had moved to Colorado. But Dad was still living in Florida, so I asked him to get my Dodge truck back from Tony, then sell it for me. I was hoping it would fetch several $1,000s. I also asked Dad to pawn or sell everything in a storage locker I'd rented. Among other things, the locker contained a chandelier and a few antiques my grandma Shelley had left me. Dad agreed and said he'd wire me the proceeds. But this was my father, so I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that when I went to collect the wire, all he'd sent me was $500, a fraction of what he'd likely been paid for my things. That was a problem for a lot of reasons, not least of which was that I was still kicking an expensive habit, Xanax, that I used to help blot out my trauma. Back in Laos, I dumped most of my supply in a toilet because I feared that being apprehended with drugs might get us thrown in jail. But I still had a small stash and it was running out. Now, not that I admitted this to Robbie, while I've been honest with my husband about the range of damaging experiences I'd endured, I think he expected that the farther away I got from those incidents, the better I'd feel. Instead, the opposite seemed to be happening. Memories I'd stamped down for years were now coming up, unbidden in vivid detail. Disturbing images would pop up into my head during the day. The black leather-studded collar Epstein had choked me with. The greedy, cruel look on the minister's face as he watched me beg for my life. I was haunted by nightmares, my abusers looming over me, about to pounce, and me unable to get away. Frequently, I was jolting myself awake, with my side of the bed soaked in sweat. I hated waking Robbie up, so I'd just cuddle closer to him. "You okay?" he'd mumble. "Yeah, just another one of those dreams," I'd say, as he wrapped his arms around me and dozed off again. Nevertheless, I was not yet willing to acknowledge how much pain I was in or how much I'd relied on anti-anxiety meds in the past. The truth was that my Xanax pills had been the truth was that my Xanax pills had been like life rafts for me, and getting off them revealed how quickly I was sinking. One day, Robbie came home from work and found me sitting on the floor in the corner of our apartment, surrounded by blood and broken glass. I had been cutting myself, not trying to end my life, but instead using the clarity of inflicting my own pain to quiet my raging demons. Robbie took one look at me and called his mother. He told me later that he could just tell by the look in my eyes that this was his mom moment. When Nina arrived, she swooped in like a bosomy angel, kicking the shards of glass away and taking me into her arms. She must have held me for an hour, rocking me, telling me it would be all right. Then she took me to the bathtub, stripped off my clothes, and tenderly washed me as if I were her own child. Once again, Robbie's parents were giving me what I'd been missing since I was a tiny girl. I would have understood if Robbie had felt angry about how utterly I was falling apart. But he was more sad than mad. Sometimes he'd reference the roller coaster that we were riding together by joking that when we first got married, he didn't know me from a bar of soap. But he was usually hugging and kissing me when he said something like that. He constantly told me how lucky he felt to have found me. Still, I knew he was frustrated, and so was I. Often I felt as if I were moving 2 steps forward, 1 step back. As I put distance between my abusive past and my non-abusive present, I could at times feel waves of peaceful energy and hope. But then that serenity did something I wished it wouldn't. It was as if my feelings, safe, cleared a path for some of the most awful memories, ones that I'd locked away for years, to come to the forefront of my mind. When you're fighting for survival, you don't process trauma, you bury it. Well, now that I was surrounded by love, all that ugliness had decided it had been buried long enough. Memories of Epstein tortured me. He'd been so particular about how girls looked, always reed thin with small breasts and narrow hips. The eating disorder I'd developed in childhood was only encouraged under Epstein's roof, where us girls were always on a diet. By contrast, the Guiffres not only loved to eat, they loved to feed each other. "I'll cook for you, sweetheart, and you'll eat everything I cook," Robbie promised, when he discovered that my diet consisted of 3 things: pizza, buttered toast, or nothing. It would take years, though, for Robbie to win that battle. At Robbie's recommendation, I tried to read a few spiritual books that he swore held some answers. I saw immediately why he liked Way of the Peaceful Warrior, a book that changes lives. Dan Millen's 1980 autobiographical novel that endorses meditation, mindfulness, compassion, and acceptance. It started off with a quote from a collection of Buddhist scriptures. Warriors, warriors, we call ourselves. We fight for splendid virtue, for high endeavor, for sublime wisdom. Therefore, we call ourselves warriors. That made going into battle sound like a sacred act. I also tried to read Illusions, The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah by Richard Bach, the Jonathan Livingston seagull guy. That one was just too woo-woo for me. I've never heard of it. I told Robbie, these kind of books love to talk about seeing colours and auras and rainbows, but I'm just trying to figure out my next step. I drew more comfort from being outside. Robbie's dad had a huge fig tree in the backyard that he was very proud of. In the late spring, the fruit was abundant, not to mention delicious, but more resonant to me was how the tree changed with the seasons. Sometimes there were so many figs that fell on the ground, creating a fruit carpet that squished underfoot. Other times, the tree looked almost naked. Whenever we visited Robbie's parents, I took a moment with that tree. It became a symbol of resilience for me. When we'd arrived in Australia, I'd insisted upon an unlisted phone number. Even with my new last name, I suspected Epstein and Maxwell could find me if they wanted to, and I wanted to take every precaution. And those precautions were working, at least for the time being. Still, while I had no direct connection with Epstein, he intruded. One day I walked by the living room as my mother-in-law was watching television. There on the screen was an actress who'd once been one of Epstein's victims like me. Now there she was on Nina's TV. How do you know her? Nina asked, seeing my stunned face. I didn't know what to say, so I turned and left the room. Then, in March 2003, Vanity Fair magazine published a lengthy profile titled The Talented Mr. Epstein. Vanity Fair. I don't remember exactly when I first read it, but I do recall being shocked by its gushing tone. Epstein was described as good-looking, charming, very generous, and like a king in his own world. His Manhattan townhouse was like someone's private Xanadu. There was a reference to Epstein's love of women, mostly young, and a description of his complicated past, a reference to some of his questionable financial dealings. But the article said many people had commented that there is something innocent, almost childlike about him. Oh, is that what you call it? I asked out loud. Innocent? Then I threw the magazine across the room. Just need to change positions. I think I can do one more chapter. No more messages. Ooh. You know what I was going to say, yeah? Talking about mental health and anxiety. Because I know a lot of people feel uncomfortable reading this book because they've been through stuff. And what she just said there about meditation and nature, honestly, for my own part, for my own experience, those two things really, really help with anxiety. Because how I managed to manage my anxiety was, it's
a feeling inside of you that will pass. So once you learn how to manage your body's reaction to it, breathing your way through it, it just brings you, like, it gets you through it. Do you know what I mean? Because before you understand that, like, I've had panic attacks, and it's because you can't control your breathing. And also nature as well. Like, I know it sounds weird, but I live in London, yeah. Like, I don't want to use bad language, but London's got some beautiful bits, but there's a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, like, just to get a simple pleasure of nature, like seeing the trees and how they change, like, she's so right. It makes you feel like life is just passing on. Do you know what I mean? So everything that you have got as a pressure, as a worry, like, we're just here, we're just getting through it. Do you know what I mean? So those two things, they really help you to get a better perspective when you're going through stuff. I just think personally. So I just wanted to share that in case it is helpful to anyone. Okay, chapter 20, welcome to the world. I loved it when Robbie called me his missus. There was so much fondness in the way he said it. I liked how proud he was when he told people I was his. But the truth is that the first few years of our marriage were tough on both Robbie and me. He chalks that up mostly to a single fact. Oh, so it's all her fault. I didn't trust anyone. I hate it when he says that because it makes me sound harsh. But he isn't wrong. In my core, I knew that men were selfish, women were duplicitous, and anyone could be cruel. I knew these things like I knew that dogs have fleas. It was a fact that I had proven that I'd had proven to me time and time again, and again and again. People couldn't be relied on. At my worst moments, even Robbie wasn't safe from my near nihilistic belief systems. I was suspicious and sometimes outright accused him of not having my back. A voice inside me still warned, don't let your guard down or you'll get hurt. So I told him I thought that he didn't understand me, that he never could, and that I didn't believe I could truly count on him. Thing is, she's still so young anyway. She's only 19. Those words hurt him because they weren't true, so he'd blow his stack. Robbie had a temper. While he tried to keep himself in check when I provoked him, either by accident or on purpose, there was no denying his anger was there. And yet somehow, after we fought, we always came back together. What bound us to one another was stronger than all the forces and flaws that threatened to divide us. In 2005, we escaped the bustle and noise of Sydney and moved to Blue Bay on the Central Coast. I loved how peaceful it was there. We could walk from our house to the beach, which Robbie and I made a point of doing every day. Robbie was apprenticing to become a bricklayer. I was working as a receptionist for a company called Employment Training and Recruitment Australia, which coached unemployed people on how to find jobs, helping them polish their resumes and ace their interviews. I'd actually been hired there after I went to them for help. My office was walking distance from our apartment, so we only needed one car. We still had little money. At times, I waitressed at night to help pay our bills, but Robbie and I were getting along, and once in a while, I'd wonder what it might be like if we could have kids. I had never forgotten the doctors who told me becoming a mother was highly unlikely. At different points in my life, I'd been told that one of my fallopian tubes was blocked, and I had polycystic ovaries, among other problems. When I told Robbie that, however, he joked that my eggs had never seen sperm like his before. Of course he did. They have hatchets on them, he'd boasted before giving me one of his bear hugs. Don't worry, Jenna. Why don't we leave it up to fate? In July 2005, we went out and had what Robbie calls a big slosh night at our local RSL club, which is peculiarly one more time, peculiarly Australian institution. The Returned and Services League was founded in 1916 after World War I, and its clubs were created as gathering points for returned military and their family members. We loved the RSL near us because the food was great, the cocktails were strong, and the prices were relatively cheap. We ordered lamb shanks and played a little keno in the casino, and both of us were drinking like camels. By the time we got home, we were so tipsy that it seemed too difficult to climb the stairs to our apartment. So we lay down in the grass in front of our building and took turns pointing out stars and constellations we thought we knew the names of. My head was spinning and we were laughing and rolling around on the lawn when suddenly I said, "You know, I haven't had my period in 2 months or so. That's a little weird." Robbie lifted his head up. "Hatchets," he said, then flopped back down. The next day, I bought an at-home pregnancy test, which came back positive. I didn't believe it. After 2 more said the same thing, however, I went to the doctor, who took some blood and pronounced me 7 weeks pregnant. Still doubtful, I wasn't convinced until the doctor performed an ultrasound and I saw the baby's tiny heart beating. Robbie was thrilled. We'd beaten the odds. Maybe one of those 7 strings we'd tied to our wrists on our wedding day and left there until they disintegrated had worked its magic on our fertility. Or maybe the doctors who'd evaluated me 5 years before had made a mistake. Either way, we were going to be parents. Wait a minute. The doctors who evaluated me 5 years before had made a mistake. Wasn't that when she was with Epstein, like a billionaire? Things that make you go, oh yes, sir, she's going to need an operation. Where was I? Or maybe, either way, we were going to be parents, and we couldn't have been more elated. We went out for breakfast to celebrate. I have a photo of me sitting on Robbie's lap afterward, grinning my face off. Then, when we got home, we called our families and announced, "We're having a baby." I loved being pregnant. I was empowered by the idea that I had someone bigger than myself to live for. Right away, I started assembling a baby book. On the parents to be page, I affixed photos of me in a bikini, my belly protruding, and of Robbie and me laughing, our arms around one another. Right away, I began singing the alphabet song to my tummy along with Itsy Bitsy Spider because I'd heard music was good for a baby's brain. One afternoon, right around my due date, Robbie was still at work when I felt a sudden dampness in my underwear. I was scared something was wrong. In a panic, I called a friend who immediately came over and ferried me to the hospital. It turned out I'd just lost my mucus plug, a gross sounding thing that I'd never heard of before, but my water hadn't broken yet. Robbie's bricklaying job was an hour and a half away, but he would have plenty of time to get to the hospital. I had about 20 hours of grueling labour ahead of me. One Thursday in February 2006 at 7:34 p.m, Robbie and I welcomed our first child, an 8.5-pound boy we named Alexander Anthony Guiffre. I was over the moon about him and felt great physically, so we brought him home the next day. In his baby book, I would soon record his top percentile APGAR test scores, his eye colour, blue-green, and his hair colour, light brown. On the page marked "Welcome to the World," I wrote,
Alex came out just perfect. About a week after I gave birth, we moved closer to Robbie's parents to a little house in Base Hill, just west of Sydney. Now we began calling them simply Nonna and Nonno, which is Italian for grandma and grandpa. Meanwhile, it turned out that one of my grandmas, Shelley, had left me not just furniture, but also a little money when she passed. I used it to fix up a baby blue nursery with a Winnie the Pooh motif, a Pooh Bear carpet, and stickers of Piglet and Eeyore on the walls. Robbie refurbished a white crib, a hand-me-down from his sister, Angie, and I hung a frilly white curtain around it. I wanted Alex to feel loved. We were nervous parents at first. Alex was hungry all the time, but he fussed a lot, and I was worried he wasn't getting enough nutrients from breastfeeding. It turned out Alex had colic, and he woke half a dozen times a night for the first 2 months. Only Robbie could get him to stop crying by turning him face down and pressing his palm into poor Alex's distended belly. Exhausted and worried about not meeting Alex's needs, I was constantly asking Robbie's mum and sister for advice. That's the worst thing you can do. But wow, how happy Alex made me. "You are truly a special boy," I wrote in his baby book when he was 1 month old. "You have no idea what you mean to your father and I, and what you have done to bring such closeness to the family." At 9 weeks old, he smiled. "I love being your mummy," I wrote. Watching Alex grow was like a medicine for me. I adored every inch of him, but there was something else too. Alex made me feel essential. He depended on me, and the simple fact that I mattered so fundamentally to him gave my life purpose in a way nothing else had before. Every parent knows how healing it can be to give your child something you didn't receive as a child. I never thought about it like that. Sometimes it felt that by tending to him, I was tending to the child I'd been, giving myself the love I'd needed. By keeping Alex safe and warm and fed and happy, I also got to experience all those feelings as the grown-up mom that I now was, but also as the affection-starved little girl that I used to be. In August 2006, when Alex was 5 months old, I was surprised to discover I was pregnant again. I'd thought that while I was breastfeeding, that couldn't happen. My doctor just shook his head when I told him that old wives' tale. Having been born 5 years apart from each of my brothers, I liked the idea of my kids coming so close together. Still, a second pregnancy was a lot to handle. Becoming a parent had put me on a steep learning curve, and I was just barely keeping up. I also worried about money, which we never had enough of. Robbie was overjoyed, though. "We'd figure it all out somehow," he said. In addition to changing our lives in 1,000 other ways, Alex's arrival made me think a lot about the importance of family. I wanted my son to feel connected to his relatives in a way that I didn't. Robbie's extended family was there for us, for sure, but I found myself missing my parents, or at least the parents I wished I'd had. In Alex's baby book, I'd written, "Remember, Alex, friends come and go, but your family is forever. We must always look out for each other and create memories together. Most important things in life, family." That was before COVID happened. Joking. COVID and Brexit and all that other stuff. And then I'd drawn a heart, but I felt like a hypocrite. While Robbie's parents were around all the time, mine had never come to visit, and I talked to them infrequently. Now I began to wonder how I could make things okay between me and my mom and dad. "I've had too much hate towards them," I told Robbie. "The past is the past. We have a happy family now. I want to let go of my hate. An idea had been percolating in my head. I knew Mom, who is afraid of flying, probably couldn't handle a 16-hour trip, but I was thinking of inviting Dad to come meet Alex. What? I want to give him another chance, a do-over, I told Robbie. My husband was reluctant. I mean, what kind of man does to his daughter what he did to you? He asked. But seeing how much reconciliation mattered to me, he gritted his teeth and said, okay. In September 2006, Dad arrived, and my mother-in-law insisted on making a huge breakfast feast to welcome him. As we headed over to their place, just a few blocks away, I was fretting, worried that Dad would embarrass me. And he did, the moment we walked in Nina's door, by announcing that he wasn't hungry. I already had McDonald's this morning, he said, which basically guaranteed Nina wouldn't like him. You don't tell the Guiffre clan that you won't eat their food. We stayed an hour, then headed back home. After that, we didn't take Dad out much, but the rest of the week-long visit went okay. My dad, however, was still my dad. There's a photo of him in Alex's baby book holding a beer bowl to my infant son's lips. You and Grandpa Sky sharing your first brewski together reads the caption I wrote, making the best of it. Today, though, I see the inappropriateness of my dad's behaviour, as well as how triggering it was for me. Forcing an adult beverage on a baby, even in jest, isn't the same as forcing adult sexuality on a child, but it's rooted in a similar logic. Adults have the power to manipulate small children who don't yet have the capacity to make their own choices. Sometimes it seemed as if my dad enjoyed doing things that were taboo, if only to watch others react in horror or chagrin as he pushed past boundaries. But I so wanted for us to be a tight-knit family that I let it slide. I completely agree that he was doing that as a sort of boundary thing, because it isn't really offensive, I think. But anyway, what do I know? Maybe that's why it meant so much to me that in contrast to my dad, the man I'd married was proving to be a devoted father. Maybe she was thinking like, oh, my life's going really well now. Maybe I can give my dad the love. I don't know. It's just hard to, understand this one. Maybe that's why it meant so much to me that in contrast to my dad, the man I'd married was proving to be a devoted father. For example, when Alex was 7 months old, he was suddenly determined to learn how to walk. That's really young. He would use a coffee table or a chair to hoist himself to a standing position, then look around for help. That's when Robbie figured out how to loop a rolled up bath towel under Alex's arms like a harness to show our son what walking felt like. Together, we often took Alex to Homebush Bay Aquatic Centre, where we could soak in the whirlpool, and to Featherdale Wildlife Park, which is home to the world's largest collection of Australian wildlife. Alex loved to go to Featherdale to pet the kangaroos and wallabies. In early 2007, we had a scare about baby number 2. During a routine ultrasound, doctors observed that our unborn baby might have a tiny hole in his heart. I remember the doctor counselling Robbie and me about what that would mean for our family, perhaps several surgeries with no guarantee of success, and he suggested we consider aborting. You're young and healthy, he said, you can just try again. But we were several months along. I felt as big as a house, and our baby in utero had already won a place in our hearts. Think about it, the doctor urged us. But Robbie and I told him no. This child was ours, and we would love him or her no matter what. Having been told wrongly that I wouldn't ever have kids, I felt that any child that I carried inside me was a gift. Alex was taking a nap one afternoon in 2007 when the phone rang. When I picked up, I would have known the British accent on the other end of the line anywhere. "Hi, how's life?" Maxwell cooed, and my heart lodged in my throat. For 5 years, not a day had gone by that I didn't think about the possibility of Epstein and Maxwell somehow tracking me down. And I was thinking about it, like it really wouldn't have been that difficult for Epstein to call Thailand and basically pay someone to give him the information because, they were obviously seen by a lot of people. Now all my old fears came racing to the surface. Maxwell was exactly as I remembered her. Breezy, charming, pushing an agenda. After a little chit-chat, she zeroed in on the purpose of her call. "I can't believe this, but after everything he's done for all those girls, Jeffrey's being investigated," she told me. "Have you been contacted?" I told her no. I knew nothing about an inquiry and had no intention of trying to find out. Maxwell said that I'd be taken care of if I refused to cooperate with investigators. "So long as you don't say anything, everything is fine," she said, even implying I might be investigated too, as if we were all in this together. "If you need legal help, we're here to help you." All I wanted to do was slam the phone down and rip its cord out of the wall, but I was afraid that if I expressed hostility, Maxwell would see me as her enemy and punish me. I was 8 months pregnant with a 1-year-old and a husband who was at work from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. As my grandma Shelley used to say, there are times to kick the hornet's nest and times not to. This was not a time for kicking. I promised I wouldn't speak to anyone. "I've started a new life, Jelaine," I said. "I just want to be left alone." I hoped that was the end of it, but a few days later, Epstein called. He said hello and tried to make nice at first, as if we were dear friends who'd somehow fallen out of touch. Never good at pleasantries, though, he added abruptly, "I'm having my lawyer tape this conversation." I would later learn that Epstein had assembled a veritable army of high-profile lawyers, one of them being, what's his name? I forgot his name for a minute, but he's absolutely just the guy with the yellow tee. He's absolutely disgusting. He sued Virginia for defamation and it was dismissed, or they settled it. I don't know. Where was I? Gerald Lefcourt, Roy Black, former US Solicitor Ken Starr, and other well-known men. I don't remember which lawyer this was, but after he introduced himself, he explained that an investigation into Epstein was ongoing, and that if it was based on allegations made, by women who'd worked as strippers and prostitutes. I literally hate that word now. I literally hate that word. Or who work addicts. I didn't need a translator to grasp his not so subtle point. The accusers had no credibility, and anyone who turned against Epstein was a skank who would be discredited. Just as in my call with Maxwell, threatening energy zinged through the phone line and hung in the air. I suddenly needed to sit down, so I did, resting the bulky landline telephone on my protruding stomach. When Epstein pressed me, "Have you talked to anybody? Are you going to?" I was determined to reassure him. I knew in my bones that if I didn't give him the answers he wanted, he would hurt me and my family. "Look," I said, like I told Jelaine, "I'm not saying anything to anyone." Epstein repeated some of Maxwell's crap about wanting to take care of me if I needed legal advice or anything else. "I don't need your help, Jeffrey," I told him nonchalantly, trying to mask the terror overtaking me. I'm a mom now. I'm happy. I don't want anything to do with this. I remembered how he used to boast about having law enforcement in his pocket. Now that he and Maxwell had found my phone number, I was sure they also knew Robbie's and my street address. Jeffrey, I have to ask, where is all this coming from? I said before we hung up. I guess I was trying to sound as if I was on his team, but I was also curious. After so many years of surrounding himself with young girls in public, at parties, in airports, and all over the world, after so many years flaunting his predilections and boasting of his superiority, Epstein had made some sort of misstep. Even as he deflected, ignoring my question, I couldn't help but wonder what it was. Only a few days passed before the phone rang again. The man on the line told me he was with the FBI and that I'd been identified as a victim of Jeffrey Epstein's. I braced myself for an interrogation, but nothing could have prepared me for how immediately explicit his questions were. Have you ever had sex with Epstein? He asked. Has Epstein ever come in front of you? The man kept going in this vein, saying photos of me had been found in Epstein's Palm Beach house. But was the caller really an FBI agent, I wondered? Or was this one of Epstein and Maxwell's minions testing my loyalty? How had this agent located me? This isn't a good time, I managed to say. I have nothing to tell you. Goodbye. It would be a long time before I found out what specifically had led law enforcement to begin looking into Epstein. But while I had little sense of what was happening on the other side of the world, I knew this. Epstein had barged back into my life, and I had a feeling he wasn't going to disappear anytime soon. Once again, a reminder that this is the book I'm reading from. I do really recommend it. I do. I'm glad that I'm here with you all. It's actually really helping because it is quite a stressful book. And yeah, someone has posted in the chat. Let me see. Okay. Yeah, I'm not the best at putting comments up because, well, I won't bore you with the details. But basically, my screen freezes, so I can't scroll it. But the comment says, meditation has done such great things for me. I suffer from severe depression and anxiety and getting out of the house and into nature as well. I'm really sorry to hear that, but yeah, I think the only thing I can say is that I know it's a cliche and everyone says it, but it really is a temporary feeling. Like I feel like this is just my own personal experience, and I'm going to wrap it up in a minute, but when I was much younger, there was literally no talk of mental health. Mental health is such a new thing that you're able to talk about now. But I think that anxiety is caused by a very genuine response to what is actually happening to us every day. If you go to the doctors and say that, do you think they're gonna come up with that one? No. They'll make it seem like there's something wrong with you experiencing anxiety. There's nothing wrong with you experiencing anxiety. It's a natural bodily reaction. So the things that cause anxiety are what we should be doing something about, but that's not happening anytime soon. So
yeah, I think once I started, and it was actually, I do have to thank my doctor who suggested I do meditation. But honestly, since that time, I don't know, it was like I took on a new, I entered a new era where, and some people find the things that I talk about, the things that I research, the things that I look in, because I'm just fascinated now with how we have got to this place. Because I genuinely feel like we're living in a world of mental illness right now. And reading this book just confirms everything that I thought, because, you know, Epstein was hanging out with these people 25 years ago, as the world was going into the digital era, and the tech world started to take over our lives where we are now. um, and really it just shows that the people in power are not well in the head. They are violent, they want to abuse people, and the people beneath them simply put up with it and are simply paid to protect them. So once you get your head around that, there's no reason for you to feel bad about yourself. You should never feel bad about yourself, because that is what is going on. And you know, there's just no acknowledgement of that when you go for mental health treatment, in my experience. But yeah, so I feel like once you start understanding managing your um symptoms, it just makes life a lot easier. So on that note, I don't want to be patronizing to anyone, because I know everyone has different experiences, but I genuinely feel for people that have anxiety. And I don't know about depression. I've definitely gone through grief, a lot of grief in my life, and that is very difficult to get through. But at the same time, you get through it. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, that's all I can really say. Thank you again for joining me. I will be back soon. I'm going to try and come on a bit more regularly. But in the meantime, good night. And thank you for watching. And don't forget to like and subscribe.